Welcome back to Podcast Recovery, everyone. We're your hosts, David O.
And Eric V.
Today we are joined by our guest, Gigi. How are you doing today?
I'm great, thanks.
Where are you from, Gigi?
I now live in Michigan, near Detroit, where the international conference is going to be for AA this summer. But I grew up in the Chicago area.
Oh, cool. Nice. And when were you first introduced to recovery?
January 1986.
Nice. And how long have you been clean and sober?
33 years plus and counting.
Yeah.
It worked for me.
That first time just did it for you?
I was pretty miserable, yeah.
All right. Well, with all that out of the way, I'm going to turn the mic over to you to share your story with us, so take it away.
All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So my name is Gigi, and I am a recovering alcoholic and addict because my drugs of choice were alcohol and marijuana and occasional cocaine. And there were two main points I wanted to make. I am going to tell my story and how I've used a recovery program to get clean and happy. But the two main points really are that I believe each of us is essentially good inside, that there is that spark of goodness in us, and it is our essence. But through our addictions and alcoholism and other problems, we've covered it all up. So with negative attitudes and bad behavior and shame. And so when we come into a recovery program, we don't really believe that goodness is there. So I want to tell everybody listening that it is there in you, and working a systematic recovery program will uncover that goodness so you can live from that place rather than from the fearful, shameful place we did live in during our active addictions.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I had a big misconception that if I went into therapy or got into recovery, that all this stuff that was festering underneath that I knew was there, but I was drinking to numb it and hide it, and I was sexing to numb it and hide it, and I was overdoing. I was afraid that all that stuff was going to come out all at once if I ripped the Band-Aid off, and that it would smother me and I couldn't handle it. And the other message is that is absolutely not true. What I experienced was that the pain and things that were blocking my goodness came out in manageable layers. And so I at first I thought, no, that can't be true of me. But then, like growing up in a dysfunctional family or so on, and noticing some of those things. But they are manageable and they can heal. And so don't worry about everything coming out all at once. So usually in a kind of an open talk, I'll talk about what it was like. Certainly, I was not a person who could get relationships to work. By the time I was 39 years old, I was looking at my third divorce.
Wow.
I had always made the definition of happiness, that you fall in love and you have the picket fence and the two children and blah, blah. And, I kept trying to get it to work, and it didn't, partly because I would just pretend to be who the person wanted me to be, because I had no idea who I was. And then I would get high or whatever to hide the pain. So I kept repeating that pattern, and it was that was one of the problems, was I kept trying to find happiness in a relationship, which I think is very typical, for people in our 20s and 30s. But using and having my background with a dysfunctional family, my dad was alcoholic, I was the youngest, blah, blah. I was not equipped at all to be healthy in a relationship. So by the time, I was 39, I was facing my third divorce. Before that, in the second marriage, I had finished that marriage and gone to grad school And I thought, what the heck am I doing here with all these smart people? And I test really well, so I got into Stanford PhD program, and I thought, what the hell am I doing here? And so I ended up at the bar every night, my Cheers bar, and then smoking marijuana every night just to handle the stress. I guess I did get through it, but I'm not sure how. So that, was pretty upsetting. And pretty much I had a daily habit by the time I met my third husband, whom I thought would save me from myself. So, he wasn't way older than I, like the other ones. And he was a very straight guy. So we got married after a very quick courtship because I thought for sure this was the one. Moved to Michigan, and he traveled a lot for business. And the big signal to me that there was something desperately wrong was that within 9 months of marrying him, when he was out of town, I started going to bars and picking up strangers. Ooh. And finding marijuana and getting drunk. And I thought, okay, I have this, advanced degree in one hand, and I had a good job by then. And here I have this seedy little private life going on. And I actually went to a psychologist and said, what is wrong with this picture? There must be something wrong. And pretty soon, after he developed trust, he said, you're in the early stages of alcoholism. I also went and got a evaluation at a local hospital's treatment center. And the guy said, yeah, you're in the early stages of alcoholism, and it'll only get worse, and it's in your family, and, it'll ruin your life. And it took me quite a while to accept that. And what the psychologist said was, try having 2 drinks, no more, no less, every night, and just observe how you are.
Huh.
So I did that experiment. I ended up using the 12 steps. And in the big book, it says, try controlled drinking. Well, what would happen was sometimes I could have 2 drinks and leave and be fine. Other times I would have 2 drinks, 3 drinks, pick up the stranger, go get the drugs. And what I established for myself over the next 6 months, thank God I lived through it, was that if I put 1 drink in my body or 1 drug, I could not predict what I would do. Mm-hmm. And what I would do in many cases was extremely dangerous.
Yeah.
So at that point, that third husband had been a counselor, and he just asked me one day, he said, what would happen if this was your last drink? And for some reason, I had gotten ready to not be miserable anymore. And I had proven to myself that I couldn't manage it. Mm-hmm. So I actually went to, a 12-step meeting. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that the 12 steps is the only way for anyone to get clean and sober.
Absolutely.
For me, I didn't like the God stuff and the spiritual stuff, mm-hmm. but what it had was, it had infrastructure, right? Mm. It had a system you could use. It had sponsors. It had something that had a track record that I thought, okay, if I'm going to tackle this thing, these people know what the hell they're talking about. So I went ahead with the 12 steps. And yeah. I went to maybe 3 meetings a week, which was a lot for me.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe that, that wasn't enough. But I didn't get to know anybody because I'd sort of go late, and leave early. I didn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was really uncomfortable to walk into those rooms, and I didn't talk much, and I just didn't know if it would work or not. But after 3 or 4 or 5 months, I started noticing that the women who had sponsors, there was a part of me that just said, oh, I want someone to be there for me too. I want someone to show me how to not feel like I need a man to be happy. And, I want someone to help me grow up and, stop doing the crazy shit I was doing. So I did get a sponsor, and we started working through the steps. And, I mean, the first thing that hit me was the extent of my dishonesty with myself.
Yeah.
I just didn't realize that I had a big hole inside of me, from my upbringing, and maybe because I'm also a highly sensitive person, there were things that I had no clue about. I mean, obviously about how to be honest with another person in a relationship. I was pretending to be who they wanted me to be. So how could I ever find out who I was? Mm-hmm. And of course, I always believed if they knew who I really was, they would run in the other direction, right?
Yep.
Yep. So, that first step about, I am powerless over alcohol. I proved that to myself. And certainly, the unmanageability of my sleeping around and the divorces and all of this before I even hit 40, I think I was ready to admit to myself that I needed something. Mm-hmm. This whole second step, power greater than ourselves thing, I just figured, okay, maybe there's a power bigger than whatever part of me had been driving the bus very poorly. Maybe there's something that knows how to run a life, and these people seem to have connected with it. And I was grateful that I didn't spend a lot of time trying to analyze it or figure out what it was. And I didn't, as they say, join the debating society to figure out what exactly it was and how, in fact, now I feel like walking in the rooms, feeling the love and acceptance of the women and not having to pretend to be anybody is a power, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe the main power, I don't know, but for me, having pretended to be someone all my life, afraid people wouldn't like me, to walk into a place where people just accepted me exactly with all my warts and all the crazy stuff I've done, that was pretty an important thing,
Oh, yeah.
So I thought, I'll take that leap, Now, making that decision, I did to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. There's that word, as we understood God. So as soon as they added those words in italics, as we understood this God figure, then I figured, okay, I don't have to believe anyone else's God. I had tried to become religious 3 or 4 times because I was clearly messed up in my head. Mm-hmm. But it never worked for me. My bullshit detectors kept going off.
Oh, yeah.
I just couldn't buy it. But, the people around the tables, we sit around tables in Michigan, not in big rooms, and we share at the tables. But, they obviously had some kind of a power that was helping them get their lives on track. So when I had a sponsor help me learn the third step prayer and actually formally take the third step together, it was probably the first prayer I ever said where I thought there was a chance that it would work,
Yeah.
Because it was working for all these other people. Now, when I got to the house cleaning steps, the inventory of 4, the moral inventory, and sharing it with God, ourselves, and another person, and then discovering what they called character defects, or, our shortcomings, our character flaws, and being willing to let go of those. That happened in layers for me, because the first layer of house cleaning really was, I'm an alcoholic, and what are all the crazy shit I did is I was an alcoholic and drug addict, and what drove me to that, and I had to, I never thought I was a controlling person until I did my 4th and 5th step, and I realized all this manipulation of men and trying to get grades, it was all to make me feel more secure. It was completely self-centered and driven by fear. And I had never owned that before. I thought of myself as the victim of other people's control. So certainly the alcoholism just coming to terms with the shitty way I treated my former husbands and other long-term romantic relationships.
Yeah.
It was just a relief to kind of lay that out there and not have anyone lead me into jail, moral jail. So
thank God that doesn't exist.
Yeah, really.
Moral jail.
And, yeah, really. And then I started realizing that they started talking about making your higher power your source of worth. In other words, I had made a man the source of my security. And they started talking about making this higher power the source of my security, instead of me working so hard to try to force the world to convince me that I was secure.
Yeah.
That it was going to come from a different place, and that no one could exactly define what that place was or how it was going to happen. But working these steps had worked for all those other people. So I went ahead with that first inventory and had a huge relief when I shared it with my sponsor and my higher power and with myself. And, started working on the character defect of perfectionism, control, people pleasing. Very interesting. And one thing about the seventh step is when I own those things and then I ask to have them removed, I see that happening in layers too, because I can still be perfectionistic, but it isn't the driver of my security. At this point, I know my higher power establishes my worth and my security, and nothing I do or say or whoever loves me, except the people that God has streamed. God, well, there I am with the G word, but my higher power has streamed love into me through other people, which I think is a really significant aspect of healing addiction. It's not like it's always this spiritual awakening with lights and flashes and horns and angels. For me, it was very much on the ground with real people streaming love and care and wisdom into me that would help me heal. So, that's been really wonderful. The second layer of my housekeeping was all the dysfunctional family stuff. I had started going to adult children of alcoholics because I knew that alcoholism and drugs wasn't the only problem. And man, when they started reading off all those characteristics of people who grow up in dysfunctional and alcoholic homes, I was just amazed.
Yeah.
And really scared. And what they said, which I loved, was, I'm not to blame for what happened to me, but I am responsible for healing what happened to me so that I can be a fully functioning person. It does not have to limit who I become in the future, which I found great hope in that idea. So the dysfunctional family stuff, well, of course, the workaholism was another issue. And I didn't get into relationships for quite a while, but well into my inventory work, I did meet my current husband, Peter, and we just celebrated our 30 years of wedding, of marriage.
Congratulations.
And I don't know if my higher power thought, well, this girl needs a man in her life. We better bring her a really great solid rock guy, But that's what happened, and it's been one of the joys of my life, kind of a big gift. And so, that was a big layer about why was I so dysfunctional in relationships and so on, all the dysfunctional family. But then, I had continued in therapy, and then it came time to realize, which I had no idea, and we had all kind of brushed it under the rug in my family with my sisters, about my father's inappropriate touching of us. And fortunately, I had a great therapist, and I got into a sexual healing group, and worked through all of my rage, about, well, shit, no wonder I've been divorced all those times,
Yeah.
And actually, before my father passed away, I had an opportunity I didn't need to write any letters or rip him apart. I just set the boundary that when you hug me, I don't want you touching me in that way anymore. And he said, oh, okay, fine. Anyway, that was a huge step of claiming my own power.
Yeah.
And I really am an advocate for counseling and therapy if there's any kind of trauma or dysfunctional family stuff in the past. Of course, I made my amends, and I really like the wisdom of splitting the steps apart, because 8 is just, okay, here's who I need to make amends to, and I'm willing to do that, but my higher power is going to set the time and the place and the how. I'm willing, and some I might plan ahead and talk with my sponsor and rehearse it, but some might just pop up because my higher power is in charge of that.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't feel, I was grateful. I don't know. I mean, everything I know I learned around the tables and from my therapists and other people, but I didn't feel that urgency to run and apologize to everyone so that I could feel better. That phenomenon. I was able to make the amends when I felt spiritually fit. For example, with my last husband, I don't think I made amends to him till about 6 years of sobriety, until I had worked through a whole lot of that stuff. And so I had no more resentment, anger, feeling of victimhood.
Yeah.
I could really own my part. And all I needed to say was, I was not the wife that you deserved or that I wanted to be. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't have to trot out all the details. He didn't want to know them anyway. Some of them, however, are in my book. So
Yeah.
But anyway, when you get down to the 10th step, continuing to keep an eye on my behavior, when am I being selfish? Even these days, I will have a tendency to run tight and be stressed. And so I've needed to be really disciplined with myself about meditation and prayer and, exercise, and to really take care of myself. And negative thinking. I've spent a lifetime working at overcoming my negative thinking about myself and other people, and discovered quite a few wonderful things through. And, it seems like once we're ready to heal, our higher power starts bringing us the resources that are going to help us heal. And so I've learned all kinds of, energy healing and tapping and therapy and spiritual tools and cognitive tools, anything to keep my head screwed on straight,
Oh, yeah.
Because I can be a worrier. So, and then the 11th step is, creating, continuing, growing our conscious contact with something, some power bigger than our fear. We don't need to understand it. We just, even meditating and not knowing what it is that happens when I get quiet, but there's some kind of peace there. Or all the way to using a rosary for a Christian, or a Catholic.
Yeah.
So there's a whole range, but the point of all of them is to be still and know that there's a higher power near, and that higher power's got things totally handled, even when we don't think it looks like they are.
Oh, yeah.
Because looking back, we can see, I was terrified of this. I didn't think it could ever work out. I fretted. I did some inventories on it. I talked about it. I prayed about it. I did more inventories on it. And then look at that. My higher power pulled a rabbit out of the hat, and it ended up better better than I ever could have imagined, and it really helps to stay in the program long enough to have a track record like that. So when the scary times come, we can remember that, we're not alone, and we have, to me, my biggest source of security right now is knowing I don't have children, so I couldn't stay married long enough to have children. So as I'm getting older, you don't have those children that are quote unquote supposed to take care of you if something happens. And so, right, a big source of security for me is knowing that if the shit hits the fan in my life, my women, my inner circle of recovering women, people have sponsored me, I've sponsored them, my inner circle will be there 100% for me.
Yeah.
That to me is my ultimate sense of security, because my higher power will be delivering that power to me through my friends, because I'll probably be so terrified or upset that it'll be hard for me to access any of that power. But my friends will be there streaming it to me. That gives me a huge sense of security. And it came, not right away in the program, but it came by continually going to meetings, working with a sponsor, meeting regularly with a sponsor, therapy, wanting, I hate emotional pain, so I've taken a lot of steps to free myself from it.
Yeah.
And, for the most part, we can never defend ourselves from it completely, but I do believe today that no matter what happens, I will be able to get through it. And of course, the 12th step, I do a ton of service work. I have sponsees and all kinds of wonderful things I love to do. It's a great way to give back what I've received. So that's about it. I think, back to the initial theme is that it was gradual for me to heal. And I didn't have to be scared that everything was going to come out at once. It did not. And also, as I healed and worked the steps, I found that there is a true self in me that is good, and that it doesn't have to be covered up with false beliefs and bad stuff or alcoholism or addiction. My job is to keep it as pure as I can so I can continue giving and receiving love. So that's about, I think, the essence of my open talk.
Yeah, that was great. That was a clear, concise message of the 12 steps.
Yeah, I like that.
I love that.
I haven't. I started to realize what you were doing kind of like around 2, and I was like, cool. Okay, I haven't heard a straight through.
You realized it that early? Okay,
What,
I
at
realized
2?
I realized it probably around 4. I was like, okay, now we're a third of the way through. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Who's a third of the way through?
Yeah. Well, we got some questions for you.
Do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll start. One of the recurring things like you talked about was like not having that identity or that sense of self. So I'm wondering, it's gonna be like a 2-part question. So personally, why do you think you lost that sense of self or sense of identity? And then the second part is like, why do you that's a general theme that I've heard from a lot of alcoholics and addicts. So why do you think alcoholics and addicts tend to lose their sense of self and identity?
Wow. Well, I think a large percent of us did grow up in dysfunctional families. So, our first experience was, I can't rely on anybody to take care of me. And then we set about a very rigorous and intentional attempt to either, we tend to go one of 2 ways. We become the little perfectionists like I did. I can get my needs met by performing. Or we go the other way and say, screw it, I'm just going to become a fuck up because everybody thinks I am already. But underneath both of those is the false beliefs that I am not worthy of love, of being cared for. And so that's that big gaping hole that's in us that and probably one of the reasons that the people in recovery programs where there's a true feeling of love and care and wanting to heal without any manipulation or control, that starts building that trust, because for many of us, the first place we ever felt that someone really did have an unselfish care for us was in the rooms of our recovery programs.
Yeah.
So I think one thing is, that the upbringing. Certainly there's if I'm genetically programmed, which there's good evidence that that's probably true, then I'm going to start grossing myself out with addictive behavior and acting out sexually pretty early, and that's going to make me feel shitty about myself.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that might operate, and I don't know how many people a lot of people who pop out of the womb kind of highly sensitive, which means we take, they call it empath now, which I don't know is a perfect equivalent. But the point is we sense other people's emotions more dramatically.
Yes.
We are bothered by bright lights. We don't like long periods with loud noise. When we're in social situations, we can stand it only so long, then we need our quiet time. And highly sensitive people have many assets. How often creative become very wise seekers of wisdom and so on. And there's a whole bunch about it in my book too. But I think that being that way makes life hard to take.
Yeah.
Because life comes at us amped up. And especially, and then when we grow up in homes where the amped up is really alcoholic and fights and throwing things, it scares the shit out of us. And then, we also lose a sense of self. I would imagine, when you say losing a sense of self, I think, well, did we ever have a sense of self?
Ooh. Yeah.
Because, as a child, I guess if you were brought up by parents who were, and I do know people like this, who were constantly affirming them and loving them and, I think they probably do grow up with a sense of self. Anyway, so that's about all I can say about that.
No, that was great. That was a perfect answer.
Thanks.
All right. Eric, what do you have?
Hold on. I'm writing that down. So what I have is, so you were talking about honesty, related to the first step, in the beginning of the share. And I guess, I've been kind of thinking, I've been writing a lot about honesty and how that kind of works in our recovery, and mainly focused on honesty with ourselves. And you were kind of talking about how you weren't being honest with yourself. So what was your process in learning how to be honest with yourself? And what did that look like? And, what are some things that you might also recognize when, you're saying one thing to try to believe something that's untrue, and recognizing that and trying to bring yourself back to what's actually honest and true about yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of my favorite quotes about honesty is by Dostoevsky. But it's lying to ourselves is more deeply ingrained than lying to others. And, I mean, you didn't ask why we lie to ourselves, but obviously we want to feel good about ourselves, right? So we justify, self-righteous, blah, blah, blah. It's their fault, et cetera, et cetera. But becoming entirely honest, I think in terms, the first piece of honesty has to be about our addiction and alcoholism, because if we keep medicating ourselves and numbing ourselves out, honesty is a no-starter. It can't happen.
Yeah.
Because so getting sober, I mean, part of why it's so hard is that our favorite defense against the hardships of the world is gone, and all their, it's life uncut. And it's hard. So sitting in the rooms, I would say, is the number one way, because we are social animals and we're shaped by how the other people around us act, especially if it's a safe environment, we trust them. And when I'm sitting at a table and all these women are being 100% honest about their character defects and their behavior and their worries and so on, it all of a sudden I get honest with myself. So I think we can't, we have to be around people that are doing that and giving us an example of it. One of my favorite concepts is, I called in my book, whispered lies. And they're what we would call in the program, people talk about the committee in our head.
Yeah.
Or some people call the stories we tell ourselves. But I call them whispered lies because one of my key points of honesty is to look at what I'm telling myself in my head. Okay, when I'm in denial, I'm saying, oh, it's their fault. They made me this way. I don't have any responsibility for this. But once I start being honest, it means I do have to take responsibility for my behavior, but also for my thinking, because my thinking drives my feelings.
Yeah.
And what I learned in getting honest about my thinking, which started, when I was in therapy, that book by David Burns, it's called Feel Good, the New Mood Therapy. It was in the 80s. And it's basically cognitive behavioral therapy. It's saying, catch the thought, ask yourself, is it really true? Or am I just making it up in my mind? So, I can't be happy if my husband doesn't stop drinking. Well, that's a whispered lie because, A, it's an unenforceable rule. You can't make your husband stop drinking, and your happiness doesn't have to hinge on your husband's behavior.
Yeah.
I can take charge of my happiness by talking to myself differently and saying, I can handle it if my husband drinks, and I need this kind of support to handle it. There's a true statement, and if it gets really bad because of that support, I'll be able to handle it. That's a true statement. So I have found, and there are a few of them, I love what's called The Work by a woman named Byron Katie. Her first name is Byron, and her last name is Katie.
Yeah.
Katie. Yeah. And she asks, is it true? So I had this whispered lie. I was worried about my business partner, and I was telling myself this stuff and believing it, and they were lies. I was being dishonest with myself because basically underneath me believing, oh my God, my business partner can't work this hard because her cancer will come back. Underneath that was my belief that I could control it, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Which is me being my higher power. It's me saying, no, I'm the one in control, and I have to have things the way I want them. Well, once I start catching how I'm telling myself lies about how things have to be and what's good about me and what's bad about me, and, all these things we tell ourselves, there's so much now writing about negativity. I mean, to me, the key to honesty is, how am I talking to myself in my head, and how is that making me feel, and how is it making me treat other people? So I really like Byron Katie's The Work, because it's a system for writing down your belief, your unenforceable rule. My business partner should not work that hard, and then unpacking it to say, well, is that really true? And ultimately, I discovered that she was working hard after her cancer because she loved her work and she wanted to do it as much as she could as long as she was healthy.
Yeah.
That completely turned around, my false beliefs. It was completely wrong.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
All right. I got another question for you. You talked about earlier in your share how when you first came to the 12-step fellowships into AA, you didn't really talk to people that much. You were the person that was showing up late, leaving early, that sort of thing. And I've seen that throughout my recovery, that it takes a while for people to build up that trust. But
Yeah.
there's an interesting part to me to me. The other side of that coin is when we're in active addiction, we're willing to meet anybody anywhere to get what we want. And if they
Right.
suggest something to us, we'll take it. Like with no second
Absolutely
thought.
right.
But then coming into recovery, it flips and we're unwilling to take those suggestions. So my question is, why is it so scary to let people help us?
Yeah. Well, the biggest whispered lie is I can't trust anyone to take care of me because everybody I trusted fucked me over, right?
Yeah.
And I'm the only one who can take care of me. But then we get painted into a corner because when we look honestly at how well we're taking care of ourselves, we're really screwing up the job. Then we're, between a rock and a hard place. So, I think it's hard. I think it's not that we don't trust the people. Our addiction is still there doing push-ups and whispering lies to us. This isn't going to work. These are just, it doesn't want to lose control. It's a fear-driven system that's been, living unchecked in us. And it's very powerful. And so in my case, it was more, this isn't going to work. I mean, but I need something, so I guess I'll stay. But I don't know if it's going to work. And also, I didn't want to have to stop drinking.
Yeah.
And it was fighting me. So my disease is and was in there saying, you don't need all this. You can learn how to handle things on your own. And when we grow up in dysfunctional families and become fiercely self-sufficient, it is puzzling that we would put our fate in the hands of a stranger at a bar like I did. But, remember, we were drugged up and doped up and alcoholed up. So we made those choices under the influence. Now we're stone cold sober and we're having to make a leap of faith without much evidence except the other people around us that it might work. So, yeah, it's a pretty tough sell, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Eric, back to you.
Yeah.
So, let me see. So you've gone to like a few fellowships, it sounds like, from children of alcoholics and, AA. And I guess, being kind of like seeing different processes and how recovery works differently. And you also kind of brought this up in the beginning or at some point during your share about how 12-step recovery might not work for everyone, but it was kind of the foundation of what you built your recovery on. How do you kind of see your recovery evolve from that, foundation of 12-step recovery to where it is now? Because you were just mentioning like, cognitive behavioral therapy and other different methods of, how you go about processing, your recovery. I mean, what does that look like now? Like from, that foundation to now?
Right. So in the 11th step, Bill W. talks about increasing conscious contact with a higher power as we understand the higher power. And he says, take full advantage of the wisdom traditions, of the writings, of the teachings. And basically, he sort of gives us carte blanche to find something that, for me personally, is going to increase my trust in this higher power to take care of me rather than me trying to do all the taking care of me. The best way I can take care of myself is by doing the footwork, and then that makes me trust my higher power more with the big things. So the footwork is the meetings, praying and meditating, service work, reading inspiring literature, and working the steps with a sponsor. That's what I call the footwork, those 5 things. Those things keep me sane. So when I go into wanting to increase my spiritual fitness, in my experience, I was just kind of led, or serendipity, or coincidence. I don't know what you want to call it, but the gals I was hanging out with, many of them were interested in what's called A Course in Miracles, which is a set of complex teachings, but mainly it teaches people the difference between being in a fear place and being in a love place. And some of my friends were reading that text and invited me to their study group, and I still go to a study group reading A Course in Miracles, because for me personally, it increases my conscious contact. When I was dealing with the incest stuff, my body, one of my therapists said, we've done a lot with talk therapy. I think you need to go now to energy work, because with trauma, it's often in your body. Mm-hmm. And so I found a person who did cranial sacral work and Reiki and different kinds of things, and those really helped me. Actually, when I was writing chapter 5, I was so afraid to disclose so much of my journey, those layers, that I had to go to an energy healer, free myself up. The radical forgiveness is, because I had a lot of forgiveness to do with my father. A guy ran across a parking lot after a meeting and said, "Oh my God, I just read the most amazing book." And it's this, by colon tipping, and it's called Radical Forgiveness. And it was exactly the book I needed to read right at that time. Mm-hmm. And it has worksheets and things to work through. I think when we ask the universe to, or we declare to the universe that we are on a journey of freeing up our best self by clearing out the rocks, the resistance, the false beliefs, the shame, all the judgment, then in my case, I was kind of led, because I kept, working in therapy and working on different things. It kind of happened organically, but it did turn out that I discovered a wide variety of tools. And they always were turned up at just the right time. Mm-hmm. Right. I do want to add one thing about ACOA and Al-Anon. Mm-hmm. In my group of gals that I've gotten sober with here in the Detroit area, it is widely believed, and I've seen it in my experience, that people who work AA and Al-Anon, and ACOA, the Adult Children of Alcoholics, is kind of a subset of Al-Anon. At least it started that way, and then it became. But that at some point, it really enhances a person's life to add Al-Anon on top of AA, if that's the program you're in. Yeah.
Yeah, I've and it has heard that. For me. I've heard that a lot. You're not the first person I've heard where it's like you get a certain amount of time, and it makes sense that, if you're sponsoring a bunch of people and they're struggling, or you have family that's struggling,
it keeps coming up. So I think maybe that's the universe telling us, Eric, we need to go to an Al-Anon meeting. You never know.
It's an interesting thing. Yeah, my sponsor says I have to live with the alcoholic in my head, and that's why she goes to Al-Anon.
That is amazing.
You have as people talk, like most people don't know this, but as you're sharing, people say little tidbits and little quotes that are just fantastic, and that ultimately ends up becoming the title of their episode. You have said 8 of them.
Yeah.
Like you've said like some like the whispered lies. What else do you have, Eric, over there? Because I have.
Did we ever have a sense of self? The
Oh.
11th step is growing some power greater than our fear. I
Oh,
love
God.
that one. That
Like-
one's a killer.
Like those are
pretty good.
those are some powerful quotes you had.
Oh, thank you.
Oh man,
Thank you.
it'll be a tough vote for us.
Yeah.
All right. But to my last question of the night, I'm just gonna go with a nice easy one. You've worked all 12 steps, so the question is, what is your favorite step? You can only pick one.
11.
11. All right. Very confident. Why 11?
For where I am right now, because it's my conscious contact with my higher power that dissolves whatever fear I have of whatever's going on in my life. And I want that fear dissolved so that I can be more fully able to give and receive love.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
That's a perfect answer. All right.
Like it.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so we're going to do the Twitter question now. So I have a few that I would like right now, but we're going to go with this one. So this is at H Daniels UK, so or H Tyndall Daniels. So when dealing, and this is a topic, so this is or a group question, so we'll all answer this. But dealing with regret and family members who think you're too good for them to see anymore because you've stopped drinking alcohol and they haven't. So yeah, dealing with people in your life who are still, I guess, either actively using or just drinking, and you now think they think that you think that they're better, that you're better.
We
Yeah.
are now better than them.
Yes. So how do you deal with like that situation?
Yeah. I didn't experience it so much, but my sponsees have experienced it a lot. And that idea that the people who are our blood relatives are not necessarily the people who are our most helpful supports in life.
Yep.
And it may seem sad at first, but I don't know anyone who has long-term recovery who feels badly about the fact that they have a brand new family, capital F, of people who are in recovery, who are working a program that's honest and supportive and caring and committed. And those are the kind of friends and people that you want to be a family, because that's kind of our definition of a family, right? They're supposed to be able to support. But the problem with the blood family is, we kind of regress back to the helpless kid or whatever we were in the family. We get triggered back into our old shame or whatever it is. And so especially in early sobriety, I think it's important to stay away from those members of the family that make you feel shitty about yourself. You will be back to them, possibly, but it will be on your own terms, and you'll be strong enough in loving yourself and having a support system around you that loves you, that you won't feel needy toward them. And some of them will surprise you and become wonderful supports, and others won't. But it's too early to tell.
Yeah.
So I say, go to tons of meetings, get your tribe, meet your people, and hang with them. Go to the social things, build a new family.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have definitely have some experience with it in early recovery. Obviously, like one of the biggest things that like we talk about in 12-step recovery is changing people, places, and things. Get rid of your old using numbers, get some numbers of those people in recovery, so on and so forth. So I did the latter. I got rid of my old using numbers. I got numbers of people in recovery. But changing people, places, and things took a little while longer because that was my perceived tribe that I had been with for so long. So some of my high school friends were a little bit tougher to just let go in the opening part of recovery. But a couple of them, as time went on, their actions basically proved what our relationship was. They weren't willing to respect my recovery. Like, they were constantly using and drinking around me, making me uncomfortable and putting me in an uncomfortable situation. So it got to a point where I started calling them less and less, started seeing them less and less, and it wasn't any hard feelings or anything like that, but it was just like our lives diverged, and that's okay. I can love them from afar. They can do their own thing, whatever. But a couple of those same friends really understood what I was going through. And for probably the first like 18 months to 2 years of my recovery, I barely saw them because they were being respectful and doing their thing on their own time. But the foundation of that respect and that love of what I was doing ultimately came to our friendships rejoining farther down my road of recovery. And they're some of my best friends, and even my one very good friend, I'll name drop him, Blake. I didn't preach anything to him, but just by being friends with him and him seeing a change in me, he gave up alcohol just over 3 years ago, and he does his own recovery, but he's now 3 years sober, and
Wow.
that's a tremendous thing. Like, I'm not taking credit for that in
Nope.
any way, shape, or form. But like, he texted me about 2 weeks ago. He was like, I really appreciate all your help, because he's also my neighbor. He lives right next door.
Oh,
So it's been an amazing journey, and I've got to see him. He's lost a lot of weight. He's healthier. And he's really proud of himself, and I'm really proud of him too, of what he's accomplished.
wonderful.
The relationships genuine ones will show you what they're really worth if you just give it time.
Yep.
All right, Eric, what do you got?
So, I mean, for me, especially with family, friends, I cut them out pretty fast.
Yeah.
Except for the ones that, there's a different, I wouldn't really call the people I used with, some of them were friends, but it becomes pretty evident. There's like a few close friends that I have, most of my wedding party, I've been friends with those guys for like 25 years, and that's like, they're not in recovery. Like, we've known each other for forever. And like, they don't pressure me to drink. They don't pressure me to like go out and party. Like, they know that this is my thing. And like, that's totally fine. And they respect that.
Yeah.
And that's great. But like, sometimes with my family, it doesn't come up anymore because we talked about this the other day on a different podcast. I do that shock value thing. So when someone's like, oh, like, have a drink with my family, and I'll be like, that drink leads me to heroin. So like, they like completely, it just,
Never mind.
And
Yep.
I just kind of like just throw a little shock in there, and it'll kind of, because it's, first off, it's family. So I'm like, if you can't accept me, like, we're blood. So like, you should be able to accept me.
Yeah.
Like, they don't ask me anymore. Sometimes they'll be like, why are you still not drinking? Or, like, you're not smoking weed. And it's like, yeah, it's just like my choice. It's what I'm not doing. At first, they were a little weird. They've gotten more respectful as time goes on.
Yeah.
But, I also don't act weird around it. I act fairly normal. But there was like a level, I guess, of just uncomfortability. And we kind of had to work through that.
That's not a word.
Whatever.
It's discomfort.
Whatever, David. But we just had to work through that discomfort of our relationship changing, and not being like, all right, we're going to go party. It's like, all right, well, I'm not going to have a drink. And like, you guys are going to have to be okay with that. Like, I don't need to have a drink. And honestly, if someone feels uncomfortable that I'm not having a drink, they might want to analyze why they feel uncomfortable about that.
Yeah, it says more about them than it does about us.
Because that, in itself is if you're not comfortable having a drink and me not having a drink, there's a problem. Because me drinking shouldn't be, an issue in this situation.
Yeah.
I don't know. But that's just,
It is what it is.
yeah, my 2 cents. Cool.
All right. Did you just peek?
I did.
Nice.
You did?
My bad. Yeah, that's my
Wow.
fault.
Eric messed up.
I messed up.
All right. Well, we would like to thank our guest Gigi for joining us tonight.
Woo!
Golf clap for you.
We're not peeking there.
Yeah,
We're good.
Yippee.
Did a great job. And we'd like to now give you...
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'd like to give you a moment to put your stuff out there, let people know where they can find you and what you have available.
Thank you. Well, it's really been fun with you guys, David and Eric, and Luna, the kitty. What a great thing you guys do. Okay, so I did write a book, and it's called 50 Ways to Worry Less Now. And it's Reject Negative Thinking to Find Peace, Clarity, and Connection. And I published it in 2018, and it's in a paperback and ebook, and I just finished the audiobook, and it's on Audible. And it's doing very well, but what I did was I put in there a lot of what you've heard. It's not just for people in recovery. I tried to put some of the recovery tools in words that people who are not in recovery could use them. And plus all those other tools I was mentioning about the energy work and all that, and a lot of other things. There are 50 of them, in fact. So the place to get the book is, Amazon is the easiest place. You'll get a better deal with my website, which is going to be down for about 12 more hours, but I'll give you the website. It's very simple. It's Gigi Langer, Langer, so GigiLanger.com. And I have a blog there. You can read a lot of things. I have a big Facebook presence, both as Gigi Langer and Gigi Langer author. And I'd love to have you go to my author page because I'm getting overflowing, my 5,000 friends. But in my Gigi Langer author, you can join and follow me, which would be great. And I do some things on Twitter also. I lead retreats for women. I do open talks. And I'm just very grateful that God is using me in this way. Never thought I would be writing a book, but God had me running up and down the stairs, to my computer. So, and just the right people came along and so on. So it's Worry Less Now is the simplest title of the book. And it's a great gift. Of course, now I'm into marketing for a person who never was into pushing herself out in the front. But I'm glad that it is something that I can promote because a lot of people have found it useful. So I'm grateful for that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is that what you wanted? I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
We
great.
we want to
Good,
give
good,
everybody a chance to benefit from this. Like we're all going for the same goal, so why not cross
So you can
promote?
put of course you can put my full name with the interview if you'd like. The Langer, Langer.
Again, we'd like to thank our guest Gigi for joining us. Here at Podcast Recovery, we are aiming to expand the scope of support for recovering addicts. Accessibility and convenience of helpful services is paramount to combating addiction. We work to bring the message of recovery to every addict, wherever and whenever it is needed. We believe that a powerful voice of recovery should be obtainable, practical, and at the touch of a button. Every addict deserves to hear a message of hope, and Podcast Recovery is here to provide it. All right, everybody, thanks for joining us. Follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, check out Gigi Langer on Facebook, get her book. Start worrying less now, everybody, but most importantly, stay safe and stay clean.